I'm going to test you.
We're doing okay?
Okay.
I'm going to move out of the picture.
All right. Now, where was the hillside located? And where was that possible threat located? You remember the dome of lethality?
Yeah.
And where were those two friendly aircraft located?
Of the mountain.
Where relative to your flight path? Where's a possible enemy aircraft? Let me ask you that.
Let's turn down and see it.
Okay. Let's see how you did. Not bad. Not bad. Does that show you the power of what I'm talking about? Yeah. Because you never would have remembered that. Now, a good pilot would. Because what that pilot would have done is translate that into a mental picture of what's going on. That's part of the problem of how we get bandwidth to the brain. How many steps you have to go through to convert a highly symbolic representation to something you can really work with. The closer you can get to the real world and the kind of skills that we learn in the real world, the better off we are. So as you recall, what I was doing is basically storytelling last time. And a little bit of my history, starting off with my experience in this drawing course and how we had capability inside of us that we don't realize, and that the whole idea is to unlock that somehow by learning new skills or by using technologies that can empower us. And then, of course, the first part of my career was associated with fighter cockpits. And that's where we indeed invented what is known today as virtual reality. And I gave you some insights into that, as you recall. And the things that we learned that this virtual reality really works. But you have to do it really well to get it to work. You remember what the key was of getting it to work?
To be compelling or believable.
Yeah. But from a sensory standpoint, what was it?
Oh, it needs to be immersive
60, 80 degrees. That's key. Of course, it's nice if you had all those other things. It's interactive and all that kind of stuff. But something magic happens 60 to 80 degrees. And sort of the switch goes off in your brain. It says, okay, I'm no longer looking at a picture. I'm in a place. That's why IMAX works so well. Why it is so, it sucks you in. Because you now have only that pretty much as your visual field, rather than, a picture within this place. This is not immersive. Now, you can get involved in it. You can get involved in watching a movie or something like that. So intellectually, cognitively, you can be immersed in it, in the story and things like that. But that is not the same kind of immersion as a sensory immersion, where you start off with this wide field of view. Okay, and then I went into this, what was happening in moving from the military side to becoming an academic, and the starting of the HIT lab in Seattle, and some of the projects that we worked on in those early days. And remember how we sort of stumbled on things. In the process of going in one direction, we'd stumble on something that was really exciting. And that then led us into another path, including this here. And I'll be talking about this a little bit later today, about this whole idea of using these virtual images as a means of impacting people from a healing standpoint. And then, of course, the entertainment stuff that came out. And I mentioned the virtual retinal display. Now this was a paradigm shift of instead of starting off with figuring out how to make a screen immersive and really big, we went to another entirely different way of doing it, which is that you take one pixel and that you scan it really fast on the retina. In this case, they're coherent. It's coherent light that's with lasers, and hence the virtual retinal display. And then the interactive virtual retinal display and the true 3D display. The true 3D display is where we not only scan an image on the retina, but we also actually modulate the light wavefront. So each pixel appears to come at the proper distance. All the 3D displays that exist today are not really 3D displays. They are binocular displays. They're binocular in the sense that you have two pathways coming to the eyes. But the picture elements are all coming from the same distance. And same is true with the cinema, 3D cinema. It's 3D screens on television and things like that. The only way that you can make it be a true 3D display is if the picture elements not only give you a stereographic cue, but also give you a monocular accommodative cue of depth. And that's what this true 3D display. So that sort of brings us up to today. Excuse me. What I'm going to call part 2. It's just a continuation of what we discussed last time. Any questions, by the way, before I get started about all this?
Oh, so just what you're saying then about the distance of the light source.
The apparent distance of the light source.
And so is that to do with the lens in your eye?
Yes.
And is it like the size of? Because I don't understand it, because it should be focusing it.
So here's what happens in the real world. I think I tried to explain this a little bit last time. When you have a light from a point source, either incident light, where you're generating its emitting light, like in a candle, or it's reflecting light from the sun. Let's say example. The sun's rays, by the time they get to the earth, because they're 93 million miles away, the sun rays are what we call collimated, in that the light rays are coming in parallel because the light source is so far away. If you brought that light source in close, what would happen? The light rays do this, because now you have a point source here and they diverge out. But when you're a long way away, they become parallel. And that's what we call collimation, which means to make parallel. Now you can do that optically. Let's say that I have a candle that sits here in front of me. This candle or an LED or something like that is emitting light. All the light rays are coming out from that. So from an accommodative standpoint, what's happening is the lens of my eye is manipulating itself so that those light rays coming from that LED will then be refocused on my retina. And it appears to be this distance away because we get feedback from how our lens is focused to our brain to tell us the distance of things, a monocular cue. Now, there are lots of other monocular cues. The biggest one is the parallax. As you move your head, this is going to change differently if it's here than if it were out in the distance. But you have this divergence of light rays. Now, if I took a lens with a focal length of, let's say, 3 inches, and I took that lens, a refractive lens, and I put it in front of that candle so that the focal distance at 3 inches, the lens was actually 3 inches from that candle, then what that means is the light rays that are coming out are then bent so that they're all coming to me parallel. That's just as if we'd taken that candle and put it at optical infinity. So now the candle appears to be in the distance from an accommodative standpoint. So that's what we do with head-mounted displays. We take this screen, and even though it's really up close, from a physical distance, we put a lens in front of it so that it makes these light rays parallel, So it appears to be in the distance, even though it isn't there. But the problem is, all of the pixels appear to be at that distance from a monocular standpoint, one eye standpoint. Now, when you add the two eyes, you may have these vergence cues, or these depth cues that come from the stereopsis. So you may have this pixel that appears to be this close to you, but still all the light rays are coming in parallel because you did this collimation. So these are two separate mechanisms, the stereopsis versus the collimation. So there's a disconnect between these cues. There's a disconnect between what your stereopsis is telling you the distance versus what the lens of your eye is telling you the distance. And that leads to fatigue. You can't look at a stereo display like that very long before you get tired. Same is true with movies. It's a real problem. Some people can't even do it. Can't even make it work at all. Okay, so the alternative is that if you can now somehow change this lens dynamically for each pixel and make it have an apparent depth, accommodative cue depth, then that would be the same as the real world. That's what really happens in the real world. But in order to do that, you have to have a dynamic element in your display that actually modulates that depth. And that can be done with deformable mirrors and with other devices that have to run at very high rates so that as you're scanning, you have a different depth of these pixels that matches up with the stereographic depth.
Is it something that can only really be corrected using optical lenses and stuff, as opposed to software?
Yeah.
Like it seems, I mean, it would have to be based on like a real simple model of how the eye works, but you could simulate that effect just using blurring.
Yes and no. That is one of the things that we've tried to do in the past. Saying, okay, if we wanted this particular picture to be focused at a particular distance, want the eye to look like it's focused at a different distance, we could cause this blurring to occur. The problem is you are defeating this automatic system which ties these two together in the eye. And so it just doesn't work. Now, you can play some games with, doesn't have to be exactly, because the depth of focus of our eye is pretty large anyhow, depending upon the light. As your lens of your eye closes down when you have a lot of light, the aperture of the eye gets smaller, the entrance pupil of the eye. The smaller that gets, the more depth of focus you have, just like in a camera. When you stop it down, you have a lot more depth of focus. As you open it up, that comes in, so focusing becomes a lot more critical to have it focused on what you're trying to take the picture of. So the same is true here with the eye. And so if you have a lot of light and have a large depth of focus, you don't have to get it exactly right. You can be wishy-washy a little bit and it still be focused on the retina because of the depth of focus. So it can be sort of sloppy. There are other ways to do this. We've done it with, the most elegant way to do it is with a deformable lens, where you're actually modulating this lens at high rates, at ultrasound rates, in order to get a slight change, just a fraction of a thousandth of an inch kind of movement that will cause a large difference in the focus of the light, the divergence of the light. So we've done it that way, but we've also done it where we've actually decided electronically switch what lens you're looking at. We have fixed static lenses, and we just have maybe 5 different lenses, and we send the beam through one of these lenses by some kind of agile way of steering it and doing it that way. Really the best way to do it was with a phased array. Phased array, I don't know if you guys know much about radar or about phased array radar. A phased array radar is normal radar is when you send out a signal, of course, you're getting something to bounce back. And so the way you do it is you scan the antenna that has this beam forming, and it scans this beam out. Then you look at the reflection coming from the direction, and you paint an image as a result of that. Well, the phased array radar works a little bit differently. What it is lots of little radars, 1,000 radar antennas. And what you do is you switch these things on, and you change the phase a little bit of the signal. So when you add all these radars together, these radar antennas together one time, you have an electronic beam steering. So you can get it to scan really fast and a different array and things like that, really fast. And so you can basically get the steering, but you can also adjust the phase of this so that, and the light wavefront, so that you can now change this apparent distance. But no one's ever built one of those before. That's all theory. And building a phased array with lasers hasn't really been done yet. And you have to work on these micro cavities and things like that and electronically bias these cavities. But it is in my patent. So I have it covered. By the time we actually do it, the patent will probably expired. But anyhow, that's that was there. Okay, well, let's move on now to part 2, unless there are any other questions. Does have any other questions? Okay. Okay, well, so in the process of doing this research at the University of Washington at the HIT lab, this guy shows up. And he shows up in 91. And he's as a summer intern, and he spends the summer with us, and then he goes off and does something else. He actually goes on a mission. Then he comes back to start his PhD. So 93, he's working on a PhD with me, and I'm his advisor in electrical engineering at the University of Washington. So it takes him about 7 years to do his PhD, 7 or 8 years. But he was into everything. And he probably did about 5 master's degrees, the process of doing his PhD. Because he'd get excited about one thing and go off this direction. And then he'd play that out, and then he'd go off in another direction and things like that. And, I sort of let him run with this stuff because it was clear that he was really excited. Well, one of the things that happened was Hiro Kato came over to do a little internship with us as well and spend a sabbatical with us. And he and Mark got together, and they invented augmented reality, basically. Nothing like that had ever existed before. And so this was in sort of in the 96 time period, 96, 97. And so we started playing around with that in the lab. It's pretty cool. And you guys know what it is, of course. You've probably already had this drilled in you, right? So what happened was we started looking at what could be done with it. And it was pretty neat because what it did was this mixed reality thing. It let us bring in the real into the virtual, or the virtual into the real in this mixed reality area. And so we started playing with this for communications and for games and for instruction, and I did the big thing in the emerging technology section of SIGGRAPH in 1999. Was that? Yeah, that was the first one, I think. And then 2000. And it was the hit of the show. And as a matter of fact, it was really fun because here we were in our little booth. People just flocked around it. I mean, there's one right beside us that was actually done by ATR in Japan that was following using our same software. And they had a virtual disc jockey. Have you guys seen any of this? This virtual disc jockey thing? Well, I need to show you some of those videos, those early videos. They were really fun. And then we did ours, which was playing this memory game. I showed you the memory game before, did I? No, I didn't. I didn't show you the memory game. Anyhow, Um, and there's kids from the MIT Media Lab, which are over across the way from, there at the Emerging Technology. And they had some things that they were doing. They kept coming over to our place. And they said, these kids said, gosh, I wish we were at the HIT lab. And we said, well, why? You know, you're the media lab, you know. And they said, oh, you guys have a lot more fun than we have. At any rate. So the magic book. And you guys know all about the magic book, but this was a big deal at that time. Because the idea is that we could sweep all the way from the physical world all the way to virtual reality and back again, back and forth. And that was the big thing, this transition from reading a real book to now seeing something virtual that pops out of that book and then going into the virtual world itself and being immersed in it, then coming back out again. And so we were sweeping all through these mixed reality things to virtuality and back again. And this is what was exciting everybody about our ability to do that. About that time, this was this little video, this TV program, that news program that came up. Let me play this for you.
Welcome back. A new kind of reading material may hit store bookshelves soon.
Q13's Elizabeth Johnson shows us a magic book conjured up at the University of Washington.
This is a story about a Japanese princess, and she's crying here.
It looks like just a regular children's book, but this book can take you on a magic carpet ride of sorts.
When we were children, you know, you'd read books with your parents, and you always want to become part of the story. And so we thought about that, and we thought how we could make that happen.
Mark Billinghurst is on the team of researchers working on the Magic Book Project at the University of Washington's Human Interface Technology Lab.
So when I look at the pages through this headset, I see 3D virtual characters coming out of the pages.
And by simply flipping a switch, you can virtually leap into the scenes.
So here's the samurai, and the samurai is looking a little bit confused because he can't find his horse.
Of course, it's not really magic. The secret is special software written by the researchers and the black squares.
On the pages of the books, we have a picture with a black square around it. And then the way our software works is that the camera recognizes this picture and overlays virtual models on top of this picture.
You need a computer, camera, and virtual reality glasses. Mark says if you already have a PC, the rest should cost about $700. The technology does more than entertain kids.
Let's look behind us. There he is. So that's the evil ninja.
It can be used to show 3D how-to diagrams, to show an ant's eye view of a flower, or to help medical students.
We're working right now with the medical school to build an anatomy textbook so you can see a virtual 3D heart and fly inside the heart.
Elizabeth Johnson, Q13 reports.
The lab is giving away the software for free, and researchers say they've already had interest from a museum and a car company, so you can expect to see the magic book technology in the real world in just a couple years.
Okay, well, this was in 2002, around 2001, 2002. And Mark and I spun off this company called AR Toolworks. And I actually took the code that we'd written to do the magic book, the AR Toolkit. And it became a commercial item. And then, of course, that when we started the HIT Lab here later on, that became one of the main things that was being developed, and variations on the theme like Build AR and so forth. But what we did was we created an industry. We created the industry from scratch. And GE picked up on it, and a lot of it became quite a popular thing on the web. And of course, then in here in the HIT Lab New Zealand, there's the Build AR and all the other variations on the theme that was based upon this original AR Toolkit library. Now, I wonder why that's blank. Oh. Okay, these are some of the things that we were doing then with applications of the, I think I had another, okay. We did a project with Scripps Oceanographic Institute and their molecular graphics lab in the University of Utah, where we wanted to figure out how to dock molecules and how to bring these molecules together. And so what we did was but we wanted to have the tangible part of it too, the tangible part where you could actually feel it. that was very difficult to do in virtual reality, is to get this tangible thing. So what the University of Utah people did is they had this way of actually generating these 3D printing things where they could print these molecules in 3D. And then what we did was instrument them with the markers, so that now we turned them into a way for you to see the force fields and the bonding fields associated with these molecules. So then you could put two of these molecules together and see how the force fields bind up and determine where the docking would take place. And it became a new tool for teaching and for doing further research as well. And then we were approached by the Boston Museum of Science. They wanted us to help them with a new exhibit that they were putting together with Lucasfilms, based on the Star Wars theme, where it was actually how to teach children astrobiology and what is it like living in a hazardous environment. So the idea was for them to play with Tatooine, the planet Tatooine, where there's not too much water, there's not much water, and how you would build a city based upon that. And so what would happen is these kids would come into this place, and we'd use the magic book technology where they built a city and put these objects together and things like that. It was incredible. We had all the material from Skywalker, from the Skywalker Ranch. As a matter of fact, some of the guys went to Skywalker Ranch and met with George Lucas, and we had the content, and we put this together, and it was a hit. It opened, you see here, in 2005, but it was the big hit. And this was done with the two HIT labs, U.S. and here, and with Nick Headley, who was a student at the HIT lab in actually geography. And he came down here a while, and it was a fun project. And so that was one way that we were getting the AR out there into the world. Now, always interacting with augmented and virtual reality was a problem. And one reason is because here you are representing virtual space, but you are indeed in a physical space. So virtual space can be infinite, can go forever, but the real space, if you're in a room, you flat run into the wall, right? And so there's always this issue of how do you navigate and move around in these virtual worlds so that they could be infinite. Now, the way this was being done, the early days, we were actually just using joysticks to fly around, or using our hands. We used hand gestures. One of the earliest worlds, we actually pointed where you wanted to go. So you'd stand and point. You control the speed with your thumb. The more you'd squeeze down your thumb, the faster you would go. You put out two fingers and you could go backwards. And so wherever you point, you'd go in that direction. That was the way of navigating in those early virtual worlds. And then we said, well, yeah, but you aren't walking any. Now, you could walk, but you had all these cables dangling behind you and things like that. And you couldn't walk forever until you ran into the wall in the room. So we came up with these treadmills so that you would walk on this treadmill, and depending on how you're walking, you would, move your way around. And then we did bicycles where you'd ride on bicycles and things like that. But none of them really were that satisfactory until we came up with this so-called virtue sphere. Now, the idea of the virtue sphere is that you're inside of a trackball, right? Instead of you being outside the trackball, what if you put yourself inside the trackball? And then inside you'd have this wireless system in which you're wearing a headset and things like that, or you could actually project it on the outside. And then you would be able to measure. You could go in any direction you wanted to. You could run, you could walk, put your wheelchair in there, all this kind of thing. And so this is a project we did with VirtueSphere, a bunch of mad Russians, actually. And it was a blast, and it worked. Pretty expensive, though, and probably not very practical to have in your living room. But nevertheless, this is a way to get that happening. We had this little game you could play where you can run around, and you know, it was a shoot 'em up game and things like that, and it was actually pretty exciting. So, I mean, what I've done is just sort of touch base on a few of the projects we're doing. There are many that we couldn't, you know, I couldn't spend your time in going through. But there were some lessons that I learned from this first foray into becoming an academic, moving from the military into the academic environment. And that is, you know, technology is really cool, but so what? You know, we could do things with these technologies. Excuse me, we can create these virtual worlds, but so what? So this took me off into this direction of, well, all right, how do I really save the world then with these technologies? How do we take them and actually tailor them to something that will do some good? Because there's some real problems that we have in the world, as you know. This is just a partial list. But I'm get concerned about this, you know. My mother just passed away in October. And she was 91. And the last few years of her life weren't very wonderful for her. And we have all this technology that will extend life, but not the quality of life. And so I'm getting, you know, I've been concerned about that. There's all this business, too, of education. Pretty much our educational institutions are broken because, if anything, what they do is turn off kids rather than turning them on and helping them be excited about learning. And then, too, we have all these things happening in the world with AIDS and with, you know, still we have hunger, and what are we going to do with energy? We're polluting the environment and all that, you know. It's just sort of daunting, all these problems we have. But when we look to the future, this is our raw material, right? And how in the world do we awaken a generation of kids who are going to have to solve these problems? The old guys, we're the ones that caused them. Now you guys have to solve them, right? And, well, you're here, you're motivated, but what about this kid here? When in fact, he can't wait to get out of the classroom to go home and play Grand Theft Auto, right? Because that's what turns him on. That's what's fun. The stuff in the classroom, you know. He's just there because he has to be there. So one of the things we started doing in the early days is how can we use virtual reality for teaching? And we started a HIT Lab Learning Center to start playing around with this. At the beginning, we had this, what we call the VRRV, the Virtual Reality Roving Vehicle. And what we did was basically take the technology and that was in these massive machines, along with the headsets and things like that, and we took it out to the school district. We actually had two of these, one all over the Washington state, and another one we drove off to Nebraska. And what we wanted to do is expose kids to virtual reality because, you know, they would not really know much about it at that time.
How long ago was this?
This was in the middle 90s, right? Early 90s, early to middle 90s. And so this followed a previous project that we'd done with Pacific Science Center. Not long after the lab had actually gotten started, about 92. We started in 89, but in about 92 we were approached by the Pacific Science Center, which is the big science museum in Seattle. And they said, would you help us with our technology academy? And what that meant was they had this summer camp for kids to go to the museum and learn about something. They had a 6-week period, and they had them in 1-week blocks, and you'd go there, the kids would go there for 1 week and learn something, and there'd be 6 different groups. So what happened was we agreed to do this because they had, you could sign up for one of 3 or 4 different tracks. One would be a biology one was a robotics, one was something to do with the environment, and then there was virtual reality. And these kids were like 9 to 14 years old. And so we had this the first set of time, and we said, okay, we don't know how this is going to work, because what we did was we took some Macs down there to the Pacific Science Center with a little 3D studio modeling thing, and the kids would build their own virtual world. They made it up what they wanted a world to be. Then they would load that up into our graphics supercomputers, the silicon graphics machines, and then we would render it in real time, and they could go in their world on the last day. So the whole first 4 days was to build the world, and then they'd come up and spend the last day playing in the world at the HIT lab. And we thought, oh goodness, they'll not get it. They'll not understand what we're trying to do here, you know. And we thought this would be a disaster, but what the heck, we'll try it out. We were wrong. 20 minutes, and they were already into it. And they built these incredible worlds. Now, each of the kids had a polygon allowance. They could only spend so many polygons. And they had to negotiate with their friends if they wanted to spend more polygons than were allocated to them. And they had to design the world, build the objects in it, so forth. And then we'd bring them up and link them in the lab and run the world in real time. These worlds were incredible. I mean, the first world that was built was called Intense Anxiety. It was Spike World. Everything was spiky, running off in these different directions. And you wander around in this town and with all these skyscrapers that were spikes coming out in different directions. It was incredible, beautiful, actually. Then there was another world that was Mr. Mountain. Mr. Mountain was this mountain that had 2 boulders sitting on the side, and then a waterfall in the middle that looked like it was coming out the nose. It looked like Mickey Mouse with this waterfall coming out the nose. And then the whole idea is you'd climb up the mountain, go through the nose, and you go inside the head, inside the mountain, and there was a forest there. And you wander around this forest with all these really stylized trees, cartoon trees, and there was a bear. You'd come on a bear, the bear's on his back with an arrow stuck in its foot. And so what you would do is you pull the arrow out of the bear's foot, and it would pop up again and trundle off. I mean, they were doing this in the process of a few days. Kids who didn't have any experience with stuff like this. Every one of these worlds were incredible. There was a world that had a hot tub and had these robots that would serve you while you're in this hot tub. And there was a shark swimming pool, and I mean, on and on and on. And but one of the things that occurred to us, there was not any violence in any of these worlds. You know, we said, ooh, that's interesting. As a matter of fact, it was interesting to see them in the groups when they're arguing about this, what kind of world they were going to build, because we just sort of turned them loose. And the guys they wanted to put some shoot 'em up things in there, but the girls would argue them out. Why would we want to do that? I mean, here we have a chance to build a new world. Why would we want to put that stuff in there? And when we were watching all this, we realized, you know, all these games that the kids get were built by adults, thinking that that's what the kids want. But if the kids are left to their own resources, they don't necessarily do it that way. And but anyhow, at the end of that first year, we found out that we realized that, well, we were getting sort of a narrow population in this summer academy. I mean, these were kids that parents could afford to send them to this, you know, technology summer camp, and that's not a representative population. So the Pacific Science Center came back again and said, let's do it again next year. We said, well, let's do it where we have some other kids. Let's make it across the population. And we went to the telephone company, the regional telephone company, which was Quest, and said, gee, could you sponsor some of these scholarship kids? Make a scholarship for them to go. So we recruited an equal number of rich kids and scholarship kids and started that second summer with them. Well, it started out and it looked like it was going to be a disaster because we found out that these kids didn't even know how to talk to each other. They were in entirely different worlds. And, the rich kids, were, getting into it and things like that. And the scholarship kids were saying, what? What is this all about? Because they hadn't been exposed to any of this stuff, really. And my graduate student, my first PhD graduate student, was thinking on her feet, and she grabbed those kids and took them up to the HIT lab and actually showed them around in virtual worlds. Some of the worlds had been built before by the other kids, and they said, "Wow, this is pretty cool. This is neat." So they then went back down to the Pacific Science Center, and they were sort of strutting their stuff, that they, we've been there. We've been in the virtual world. Here, let me have that. Take over the mouse, and they started doing it. They realized they could do it. And the neat thing was that at the end of the week, when they brought their worlds up, the world was built together by the rich kids and the scholarship kids. And lo and behold, one day I saw these two guys walking out of our lab with their arms around each other, because they had built a work that they didn't, they would not, their paths would not have crossed, but they did it, and they built a world together. We didn't intend this to be a social experiment, but that's what it was. By putting these kids together, they realized they had more power than they thought. And again, the worlds were marvelous, and no violence in them. So after that, we got approached by the Seattle Southwest Family Services Center. They said, "We want you to help us. We have these throwaway kids that we're dealing with. These are 14-year-olds that have been expelled from school because they're doing drugs. They're actually selling drugs, carrying weapons, or whatever. They've been expelled from school." And they said, "We need to keep them busy, keep them off the street, because otherwise they're going to cause a lot of trouble. Would you help us?" And they knew what we'd done with the Pacific Science Center, and we said, "Okay, well, we'll give it a go and see what." And there were 20 of these kids, and we asked them, "Well, what is it you really are trying to do?" And they said, "We want to keep them alive one more year. That is our metric. If these 20 kids are alive 1 year from now, then we will have succeeded." It was that bad. And so, and I said, "Well, what is the biggest concern you have with them?" Well, really it was HIV and AIDS, because these kids are shooting up drugs and they're promiscuous and all this kind of thing. So we said, "Okay, well, maybe we'll do something about AIDS and HIV. And we'll come up with some kind of simulation, a game or something that they can play." And we thought about it, and then we said, "What are we doing? We don't want to do that. We want them to do that." So we gathered these kids together, and let me tell you, that was a rough-looking bunch of kids. They were streetwise kids, and pretty rough around the edges. Their home lives were awful, of course. And we told them that they were going to build a virtual world and having to do with AIDS. And here are some computers that you'll use. We'll show you how to use those. Here's a library you can go to learn about AIDS. Here's some doctors you can talk to about AIDS. And here's some people who have AIDS you can talk to. And we turned them loose. Unbelievable. They created this simulation and a game of a T4 cell. And a T4 cell would go into this space and it would be attacked by the HIV. And the HIV would bleed it of its energy, you as a T4 cell. And the only way that you could keep your energy up was go to these different sites. These sites are in this space where you're navigating to. One of the sites was a condom. And then another site was a clean needle. Another site was a bleach to clean needles. Then another site was a zipped up pair of pants for abstinence. And so they came up with this all on their own. And then you start playing this game. And you go in this world, and by golly, you get hammered by these HIV guys. And if you didn't get to one of these sites and replenish your energy, you know, you would actually stop moving. And one of the things that they finally realized is when you're dead, you don't move anymore. That was a real revelation of these kids. And so they made this into a game. They wrote a rap song that went with the game. And then they asked to borrow video cameras, and they made a movie of it, of them playing this game. And they said, can we take this around to the schools, to the middle schools, and show them to the kids? And the school district agreed to that. So here you had these 20 street kids marching into a classroom, and boy, let me tell you, these other kids would listen to them. The students, they wouldn't listen to adults, but when those street kids came in, you know, they listened to what they had to say, and they showed their movie and talked about AIDS and, you know, what they learned and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the year, the city actually hired 2 of those kids as AIDS counselors. The whole thing was not about VR. It was about doing things where kids can realize they have more power than they think, that they can do things. And you'll see how this pervades a lot of the things after this that we did in the HIT lab. So we did this VR RV, and there are about 8,000 kids. I had a chance to go into our worlds. 350 built their worlds together in classrooms. And it was, again, another experiment. And a lot of those kids ended up in the HIT lab doing their while they're undergraduates as well as masters and PhDs. And it all happened because they had that experience, you know, in a virtual world that we took out to the school districts. Then there are lots of other projects we did. One of them I want to tell you about is Project Starship. And this was actually funded by the Museum of Flight in Seattle. What they wanted to do is build an experience for kids to understand what is it like to explore in space, and in particular to find planets that would support life, sort of astrobiology kind of stuff. So what we did is we built this hypothetical starship. You can imagine the fun that the kids had working on this thing, the students. And I had students, you know, from pretty much everywhere at the university, as I mentioned before, that they were from, you know, art and drama and music, and from oceans and fisheries, and all the engineering and things like that. So anyhow, we constructed this starship. These are shuttle bays. In each of these shuttle bays, there would be a shuttlecraft. And so what I did was I gave the drama students a couple $100, and I said, I want you to build me a set that acts like the shuttlecraft, because you're going to actually fly a shuttlecraft in this. So the idea is that you'd probe, you'd fly as a team using computer workstations this ship, And then you'd find some planets that look like they might support life, and then the whole idea is to send the shuttlecraft down there, check it out. So in this starship, you had these, this is the shuttlecraft, one of the shuttle bays. And this is one of the shuttlecraft that they designed. And so you could actually go into the shuttle bay virtually, walk around the shuttlecraft, physically walk around, and this is what you'd see, right? And then when you open the door, this is what you'd see inside. This was actually the shuttlecraft control system. And this is what it looked like virtually. This is what it looked like for real. This was the set. So even though you're sitting there in front of a real panel, there was nothing on it. But when you switched on the display, there were controls all over the place. And you could see outside and things like that in the shuttle bay and so forth. And you walk around this structure and you see the shuttlecraft, right? And so here's one of Rachel Ennis. This is one of our students that is actually has her hands on one of the control panels to operate the shuttlecraft. And so what would happen is that you would come to the planet, then you would retrofire your engine to slow it down. We had chemical engines, even though it also had warp drive in it. And you would go into orbit around this particular planet that you wanted to investigate. And then you would launch your shuttlecraft out one of those shuttle bays. And here, this is one of the students flying the shuttlecraft around the mothership. This is what you'd see looking out the window. Get a good view of the mothership. And then you would go into a re-entry profile into the atmosphere of the planet. And then once you landed, you'd open the shuttle bay door, walk outside, and there you would be in this new planet. And just so happened that we used the Sojourner images from Mars. 3D, 360 degrees, and there you stood on Mars. And it was like you were there. You looked around, you could walk a little bit, not very far, on the planet. And let me tell you, you never forget it. Once you can look at all the pictures you want to on screens. You can look at the things in National Geographic magazine. But it's nothing like standing on Mars and looking around. So there are a number of other projects we did too that had to do with modeling Puget Sound and bringing that into classrooms. And I can't go into all of this, but we actually would create these three-dimensional immersive models of all the sensors that are around the sound area. And then we put it into classrooms and then went out on the research ship and tested the models that we'd built, things like that. So these are the things that we learned about VR and education. Learning can be accelerated in an immersing environment. We found out, it was amazing, that this was especially important for alternative learners. We found that this was a great way to build models in your brain, is by being in an immersive environment, being able to use your hands and things like that. And you never forgot it. Once you went into a virtual world, you never forgot it. The retention was high. We showed them that learning can be fun, especially when we built these worlds. A lot of them, one of the worlds that the Kellogg School built was a nitrogen cycle world. And just with a bunch of kids in a classroom and a teacher, they built this world, and then other kids could go experience the world. Okay, so let me just go to one more here and we'll take a break. Pain. Okay, how do we in the world we get into pain? Well, I mentioned to you before this personal eyewear display that was one of my patents early on in the early 90s. And it received quite a bit of attention, but was a commercial disaster, as I mentioned before. except for some of these vertical markets, like Parkinson's disease. I think I mentioned this before, didn't I? And entertaining little patients, the dentist. Well, as a result of this, observations we've been making with in the dentist's office, we said, you know, something is going on here. We put these kids in a virtual world and they don't notice the pain. And so we worked out a deal with the Children's Hospital, which was nearby the university. And we we got the physicians to cooperate with us on this experiment, where we'd take the kids who had leukemia. Leukemia, as you know, is a blood disease. It's often fatal. And they treat the kids with chemotherapy. But you have to know how it's going. The only way you know how the chemotherapy is going is if you take bone marrow extracts to see what's happening in the bone marrow. And so what you do is you take this big needle, you stick it in the hip to extract the bone marrow. And it's excruciatingly painful. You can't anesthetize the kids because they're really sick. So we went to the clinic where this takes place, and we gave these kids this Nintendo to play with the headset on, play Nintendo. So the kid would be bent over where the doc's getting ready to put in the needle. The kid would be playing, and the doc puts in the needle. The kid goes, keeps going. And everybody was looking at this and said, what? Usually they scream, you know. And, well, I mean, we knew that television numbed the mind, but this was, you know, this is for real. So this launched us in this entirely new world, this project. We started with VR and pain. And we started working with the Harborview Burn Clinic, with people who had been burned. And this, by the way, is the first time ever, there's a magazine, there is a journal called Pain, the first time ever that there was a photograph on that first page. Usually it's molecules and things like that. This time there was a photograph of this pain therapy we're doing because this was so revolutionary. So here we have one of our early headsets and a nurse that's doing some wound care on this patient. You see this, what he's got in his hand. He's playing this game while this is going on. So in the course of this work, we found that if you look at what happens typically, and these are burn victims that really are fairly badly burned, that if you have them just resting in bed, you can control the pain with morphine, with opiates like morphine. And so you see over these patients, very few have severe pain. Most of them are out here. And this is all being controlled with morphine. Now this is rest pain. But when you start doing some therapy, say for example, you're addressing a wound, you are removing a staple from a skin graft, staples from a skin graft, or you have you're doing physical therapy to get them to move, or you put them in this vat of water like a big bathtub and you soak them and you slough off the dead skin and things like that. Anytime you do one of those things, this is what happens. You cannot dose them with enough morphine. It's what we call breakthrough pain. I mean, before they pass out. And this pain is excruciating. And so we started working with these patients and created this world, this snow world, among other things. And this started us off on an entirely new direction again, where we had some funding from NIH, National Institutes of Health. Paul Allen, he was Bill Gates' companion at Microsoft, starting Microsoft, and other private donors. And our research started off with this first patient where we were looking at comparing what it was like going through this wound care procedure while this person was playing Nintendo using a set-top box like this versus playing in an immersive virtual world. And here's another patient that's doing the same thing. So this is what we found. These are the results. The red is playing Nintendo. The blue is VR. This is the pain ratings that came out on the scale from 0 to 10. Worst pain, unpleasantness of pain, times spent thinking about pain, anxiety, and your feeling of presence in the game, right? So what you have is a direct correlation between the feeling of presence and your experience of pain. We couldn't believe it. And we thought, well, yeah, well, this will work for a while, but as soon as the patients get used to this VR stuff, it'll go away. It did the opposite. It got better. The more you did it, the better it was. We couldn't believe it. Here's so one of the problems, of course, was how do you do this if you've got this patient in water? You don't want to put a lot of electronics on the head while they're in soaking in a bathtub. So we came up with this water VR system, which uses fiber optics. These are fiber optic light pipes. No electricity at all connected to this patient. I guess except through the headphones they had here. And then we said, okay, well, what's going on here? What is really happening in the brain? So we started putting these people in MRI scanners. fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, and here again we had to have almost a metal-free system because we couldn't put any metal in that magnet because it caused a real problem. So we piped this virtual world into the patient or into subjects. These were grad students actually, good use for grad students, and we inflicted pain on them more than usual. And looked at what happened in their brains with and without VR. Now, we came up with some magnificent ways of torturing grad students. What do you think was the best, what would you think were the methods we used for this introduction to pain? What would be the best ways to introduce pain in an experiment like this?
Sharp object.
Punch a sharp object at them? I'm afraid the ethics committee wouldn't let us do that. Yeah.
Give them some homework.
That had already been done. They were immune from that.
Chinese burn. Skin.
Nope, but you're getting closer. We had several methods, but
Something that you're showing them.
Something we're doing to them. Closer, but other direction. Yes. You take a person's hand and put it in ice water. You can measure over time how much the pain goes up. You can also heat up the soles of their feet. And the hotter that gets, the more pain there is in the soles of the feet. There are a lot of nerve endings in the soles of your feet. One of my favorites was shocking the tooth pulp. You put a current right through the tooth. Change that current, and depending upon the level of the current, you know. Yeah. And then there was the tourniquet. Ethics people didn't like the tourniquet very well either, but those others were okay. Anyhow, what we did is inflict pain on these subjects. And this is what we found had happened. So here we see the brain activity. Basically these are metabolic activities in the brain as a function of just the introduction of pain itself. You see all this lighting up here. But this is with no VR. But look what happens with VR. It's practically gone away. But look what happens up here. There's a frontal lobe thing happening. You don't see any frontal lobe here, but you see frontal lobe here.
What's happening in the back lobe as well? The back of the brain.
Yeah.
Activity's disappeared from there.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a shifting of activity. So this is real. And it all has to do with where we're directing our attention. In order to experience pain, you have to be conscious of pain. Here's one little patient that used some of our therapy.
This was an area.
We were cooking pasta and Nathan touched the pot and pulled it on himself.
6-year-old Nathan Neisinger has endured skin grafts, months of wound care, and more pain than safe doses of narcotics can kill.
It can ease their pain, but their mind's still directed to, they're going to go into the tank room, they're going to get scrubbed down.
Then there's physical therapy to stretch his scarred skin. But through it all, Nathan's brain can go off to play in a 3D computer-generated world called Snow World.
What we're really trying to do is just to pull his attention away from what's happening in the therapy, to put his attention in the virtual world, and by virtue of that, have him experience less pain.
The University of Washington psychologists Hunter Hoffman and David Patterson created Snow World for treating burn victims. Their clinical studies with patients like Nathan are showing how effective virtual reality is at fighting the fire of burn pain.
Patients who went into virtual reality reported having large reductions in how much pain they were experiencing, typically 40 to 50% reduction on average.
In an article in Scientific American, Hoffman described how a special virtual reality helmet that would work in an MRI scanner confirmed this. The brain scan showed far fewer pain signals with virtual reality than without it.
So I didn't feel anything really, but I did feel some pain, but not that much.
Anything to get his mind off, seeing the nurses with their, equipment trying to work on him helped out a lot.
The researchers hope virtual reality will soon be available to help many more patients escape their pain. I'm Oren Schoenfeld.
Pretty amazing, huh? So these are the lessons learned. Yeah. But this incredible power of sensory and cognitive immersion and what this does, that when you are actively engaged cognitively in one thing, you can exclude other things. It's like the brain is multiplexing. And as something draws its attention, it starts concentrating just on multiplexing on that. Ignores the other things.
You think there might be something else going on there, like a psychological aspect, where like people who are in like pain or some sort of anxiety are quite willing to believe something else as long as it takes them away from that negative emotion. So maybe that's sort of
could be. I mean, it's obviously a high stress situation for them, and I mean they're looking for analgesics or things that to take their mind away. Could be. On the other hand, they have this heightened awareness of those things. So that's what makes it even worse, that they're anticipating the pain and that kind of thing. So it's difficult to say. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts to it. Yeah. Okay, well, let's take a break for about, let's say about, come back at, clock is a little bit slow, but let's come back in about 10 minutes. Okay, as a matter of fact, if we had time, I'll show you another little video. But, okay. So we found not only can we use this for educational purposes, but and for pain, but also for simulation, for medicine. And at least in the HIT Lab US, we constructed a number of these surgical simulators. As a matter of fact, this TURP simulator, transurethral resectioning of the prostate. That's when you go out and you carve out that prostate when you can't pee anymore, and that happens to the old guys. And by golly, I want my surgeons to practice on this TURP simulator first before they do it on me. Because if they carve a little bit too much away, it sort of reduces your will to live. If you get among, you cut nerve endings and things like that you don't want to cut. number of spin-off companies as a result, and so forth. Now, I mentioned to you this virtual retinal display. Now, did I mention to you what happened in terms of the low vision side of things? No, I guess I didn't, actually. Okay, so here I was in the lab one day, and this guy shows up who wants to see the VRD. And he's actually on the board of directors of the Washington Technology Center, so I felt obligated to show it to him. So we brought him into the lab, and he was looking at this is this monocular display, this one right here. He was looking at it, and he said, "Wow, this is really great." And we said, "Okay, take off your spectacles and look at it." So he took off his spectacles, and it's just as clear, because we aren't using really the optics of the eye. We're sort of going right to the retina. And he said, "Wow, that's really interesting." And then just on his own, he happened to look with his other eye. And his mouth dropped open. He said, "What are you guys doing here?" And we said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "I'm blind in my left eye. And I can see just as clearly in my blind eye as I can in my real eye." We said, "Oh, yeah?" And so we found out he'd been in an automobile accident years before that left a lot of scar tissue in his eye. And his retina apparently was okay, but he still couldn't see. So we're getting through that. And then we went over to the Department of Ophthalmology at medical school and told them about this, and they started sending patients over. Same thing was happening. These patients that had various problems, optical problems, even ones who had degenerative diseases of the retina, age-related macular degeneration, retinitis pigmentosa, things like that, were able to see with this better than they could with any other method. So that started us off on a whole new direction of our research. Now we got an NSF grant to work on low vision. And again, it was because we stumbled across something. And that's where most of the fun happens. You have to be heading in some direction in order to stumble over something. But then that might take you to another direction. And that other direction is more interesting than the direction you start off to begin with. So this virtual retinal display ended up doing lots of cool things. Let me mention a few of them. This low vision aid was one of them. I got a Discover Award for this, like the Academy Award in technology. You know, they don't give the Nobel Prize to engineers or the Academy Award to engineers, but they give the Discovery Award to engineers. And Mark also won one, by the way, for augmented reality. But he did. So one of the first things that this just shows you this projection of information over the work field where you're trying to perform a particular task is done with this virtual retinal display. That's one of that's the Nomad display. That's one of the things that Microvision has built. But here's another one that they built for medical activity. And here's actually the use of it.
The VRD lets you superimpose information on the field that we're working in. You could think of it as being able to superimpose the map of this patient's anatomy directly into the surgical field. And the VRD lets you do this because you can see through the display and into the patient.
If you watch neurosurgeons, for example, if you look around here, you see a backdrop of all the information that they have to look up and take a look at. You have information about the spatial location that they're actually in that you got from previous MR or CT data. You have the information they're getting out of the surgical microscope. You have an enormous amount of physiological ancillary data that you have to monitor, like blood pressure and pulse oximeter. And if you watch the neurosurgeon, it's like he's at a tennis match. He's looking down at his hands, he's working, and he's looking around back and forth to get all this information, which leads to fatigue. It's going to allow neurosurgeons to get all that information that they need and stay very comfortable.
In the field of neuroendoscopy, where we use a small telescope to look down into a deep structure either in the back or in the brain, we're looking at a two-dimensional object on a television screen, and we're using an instrument that is going to be manipulating around very vital structures. This will give us a much clearer image. We won't be oriented by looking one way at a television set and the other way at the patient when we're putting our hands out to do something. We can certainly shorten surgical times if we have better vision, if we can see what we're doing. The VRD can be used in any microsurgical procedure. I think it will be quite helpful.
Yeah, this was an application we didn't think about. Displaying, getting the see-through part of it. So as a result of the work we were doing in the virtual retinal display, we realized that we're sending the image up with a fiber. You can, I think I told you about this before, a single monofilament fiber that comes up here. And then we're scanning it with this mirror system, and then it goes through this beam splitter into the eye. Well, one of the things we realized was actually we could manipulate the fiber itself and scan the fiber. And if we put a piezoceramic material and modulate that, we could actually scan out a raster. And what we did, this is just modulating the tip of the light coming through a fiber while we're scanning it in two directions. And what we could do also is pipe light through this fiber and then have other fibers to pick up the light that's reflected. And therefore we create what's equivalent to an endoscope. An endoscope that is incredible in terms of its size, really, really small, and with incredible resolution. And so we were funded by NIH and Pentax and some others to build this new fiber scanning technology. And this is one of the ones that looks like this. This is one of the larger ones. We're now down less than 1 millimeter in diameter. And here you see the middle fiber that sends the light in, and these separate fibers here that pick up the light and take it back. And this is all less than 1 millimeter in diameter, if you can imagine it. And it'll go into places in the body that you can't get otherwise, like in the pancreatic duct and things like that. Furthermore, you can deliver 2-photon therapy here. You can ablate, lesions and things like that. And a few months ago, the guys at the HIT lab actually imaged inside a rat's bladder. So you can imagine the size of a rat's bladder, and went inside the rat's bladder and imaged inside. Now, it didn't make the rat very happy, but nevertheless, that shows you what the size of what we can do with this. It's amazing. And going into the lungs here that you see, 6 times deeper in the lungs than you go otherwise. Another thing we worked on was this single cell, what we call optical tomography. This is where we actually create like a CT scan of a single nucleus of a cell. Take a broncho washing or scraping inside the mouth, and then you pick out a cell, and then you look at making a 3-dimensional model on the fly of the nucleus of that cell, and you can tell by looking at the morphology of the nucleus of the cell if that cell is going to become malignant, if it exhibits some form of dysplasia because it's mixed up DNA. And so we can predict if a person is going to get lung cancer by looking at scrapings in the mouth. And so we invented this tomographic 3D reconstruction that lets us do that. Another project we worked on was green space. How could we build a transportation system for the senses to link minds? We started working on this in the early 90s, of how could we use VR to put people in the same virtual common. It's like video conferencing on steroids, where you're in these 3-dimensional spaces. So we had this first demonstration in '94 that was funded by Jiu-Jitsu. And on the first day of this, the way this setup worked is that we had a fiber link from Seattle to Tokyo. And then at the Tokyo and Seattle ends, we had a Silicon Graphics Onyx machine that would do the graphics rendering. And then what would happen is we would send our faces, we'd scan our faces in Seattle to Japan, and they would scan their faces and send them back to us. We would put them into a virtual world, and then we would actually activate that face as a function of the speech. It would actually move and things like that. And then when we went to the Japanese world, we looked out the window and we see Mount Fuji in the background and a Japanese cottage and things like that. When they went to the world, they were in a log cabin and they look out the window and they see Mount Rainier. And even though we were in the same virtual common. And then what we had to do is, what are you going to do when you're in this world? We came up with this game that you play. And so you have two people in Japan, two people in Seattle, in the same shared virtual common in 3D that would then play this game. And there were these three-dimensional creatures that would ooze out of the table, and the whole idea is that we had to take our virtual hand. We had a virtual hand controller where we instrumented the hands and the head and the headset and all this kind of thing. And you'd move these guys around. So what I'm going to show you is a video clip from the first day, the press conference we held on the first day when we opened this up. And I mean, the news media went berserk over this. We were in the front cover of the Wall Street Journal and things like that, this particular demonstration.
Are we ready?
So.
Okay. Dr. Kawahata, are you there?
Yes. Dr. Furness. I'm probably in the virtual common now.
Okay.
Where are you now?
Paul is just getting into the virtual common. I'm in the virtual common. Here's my paddle.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to look over at you. Okay, let me see if I can find you.
Yeah.
Okay, who's that?
I can see you.
Oh, there you are. You're over there. Yes.
There you go.
What are you doing over there? Okay, are we going to...
I'm just relaxing and seeing the Mount Rainier.
Ah, okay, well, let's shake our paddles together here.
Can you see Mount Fuji?
Ah, Mount Fuji. Ah, yes, there it is, out the window. Very nice.
Yeah.
Let's see, I don't quite see it all, but let me move over a little bit. Yeah, there it is. It's beautiful today. Nice weather in Japan. Do you see Mount Rainier?
Beautiful today. Yes, I can see that, and blue skies, and a little bit cold in Tokyo today, but very crisp and very nice day today.
Well, in the virtual common, the sun always shines in Seattle. Do you believe that? Okay.
Yes.
Paul, what are you doing way over there? Oh, here's some creatures. You see the creatures, Dr. Kawata?
Oh yeah, yes.
Let's move them over to the side of the table there. Get them.
Yeah,
let's
okay.
herd them together. Which direction we're going in? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's see, they're in your lap now. Oh, wait there, whoa, whoa. Look. Let's get them over the edge here. Whoop.
Right in front of you.
Yep. Oh!
Good in.
Yes. Why don't you stand up and I'll stand up too.
Okay, I will stand up.
Okay. You're getting a little shaky there though. Okay, I will sit down. We will now open the door for all of our people from this side who want to enter into the virtual common and to the green space. They will be able to do so, and we can do the same at your end.
Yeah, we will do the same. Thank you very much.
Oh boy, there's a great big one. You left-handed or right-handed? So now your sister's coming into the world with you, so you can work together.
Okay. Hi, Joey. Put this on your center head.
Yeah, if you want.
Great. Yeah. Let's see if I can get this over your pigtail.
If you look to your left, you can see a mountain.
And crank it down.
Look over to me. Look over towards me. You see that big mountain?
Tell me if that's right in front of your eyes. Is that pretty good?
There's a wind blowing.
Yeah.
Somebody open the window.
Can you see pretty well? Well, if you look over to your right, you can see Mount Fuji out the window.
Okay, anyhow, we had 350 people over a 4-day period that went into this virtual world, this virtual common. Cost us $35,000 in telephone bills to do that. But it was amazing, and we found out what could be done. So after this, you know, people ask us, well, that's really cool, but what could you do with it, you know? And so we started thinking about it, and we started working with some architects, and we came up with a way that the architect building world, a world building world, where the architects would go into this space, and they would be separated geographically, and they would actually take these tools, design a building together, and then they would actually walk through the building and view various places and, you know, change it and things like that. So we did projects for Homeland Security, a lot of problem with water and fire, as we can tell here, and earthquakes, and here's the Alaska Way Viaduct in Seattle. Here's the former Kingdome that used to be there, and so here's the viaduct. The same as in San Francisco, this 2-layer thing. Well, guess what? Earthquake happens down in San Francisco, and we have about 8 minutes to get the cars out of this before it collapses, you know. So those kind of issues. So one of the things we designed was a just-in-time command post, where we would now have, you basically build a command post on the fly by using augmented reality. And so you can have this on the hood of a police car, and actually bring up all the information you need to get the medical, the fire, and police all together. And so you're basically, what you're holding turns into this map, and you interact with it. And you have all the people observing through their cell phones, smartphones out in the world, sending back information. You see, you tap each of these things and get information back and vector them around. This is all done just in time. You know, you set up a command post when a disaster has happened. Okay, so saving the world lessons, I think, is important to work on some real problems. It's interdisciplinary. There's not anybody that owns it. We find out that the pull of having this necessity is truly the mother of invention, because a lot of these things you've heard me talk about wouldn't have happened unless we stumbled across something or there was a need for it. And we started inventing things because there was a need. So you need to have this creative tension between what I call the push and the pull. The push of technology and the pull of applications. And these two have to work together. And then finally, you have to count on serendipity. You guys know what serendipity is? Serendipity is sort of things that just sort of happen by accident. You know, like the planets get aligned and things like that. So we set up these clusters, these HIT lab clusters. Here's Mark in augmented reality, the human photonics, the advanced interfaces, and all this kind of thing. And these people just did incredible things. And that's what happens when you get empowered. And we had students from all these departments working in the HIT lab. And that's where the magic happened. We had as many artists in there as we had engineers, and drama, and oceans and fisheries, and geography, and psychology, and medical school, dental school, nursing school. You see all the departments here in the medical center working with the burn people. And you'd work in project groups, the students would. You'd have a student in a 4-project group. You'd have a student from electrical engineering, from psychology, from oceans and fisheries, and drama. And you get 4 patents a day out of them, because of different perspectives of looking at things. These were the companies that helped support our work. We had, in the end, we had about 50 companies. They would pledge 50 grand a year or equivalent to work on those things. And from this, we developed these incredible transformational technologies. Not disruptive, but transformational. They changed the whole way things are done. Like our virtual retinal display and the magic book augmented reality, the endoscope, tomography, these medical simulators. This is another thing I didn't talk about. We found out, came up with a way for overcoming simulator sickness and seasickness. There's a patent that we have out there that you wear this thing and you won't get seasick. And the pain stuff, yeah, pretty amazing, huh? So in the course of these 20 years, 21 years, I mentioned before, we spun off 26 companies at a market cap of over $10 billion. That was done with guys like you. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we had this group that came up from New Zealand to visit us at HIT Lab US, and they said, "Can we do one?" And that was began around 2000, 2001, and the lab was formally opened in 2003. And I recruited Mark, who was finishing up his PhD in electrical engineering, to come be the director. And that's where he's been since. You guys have seen all the promo stuff about HIT Lab New Zealand. And then in 2006, Oz comes over and says, "Gosh, if the Kiwis could do it, surely we could do it." And so we start the HIT Lab Australia, which is now coming along pretty well. And one of the things, they have a vision space theater as well, and they've created this racetrack that's recreated a racetrack that used to exist about 30 years ago, and you can drive the cars around on this racetrack. And they've most recently, the third-year students, we have an undergraduate program there, developed this world play, which is being able to create a world within a 3D world within 3D, and do that in the Vision Space Theater. Wow, so time's up. But I wanted to cover some things that, in the end game, really are, I think, important to us all. These are things that, in my trek to save the world, that really break my heart. This is a devastating thing that's happening, especially in Africa. And how many orphans? There's 13 million orphans we're going to have out there, if we don't have them already. It's the long goodbye. It's not a quick death. It's an agonizing thing. Also, this dumb thing that we do in war. You know, even though I used to be a warrior, it's, you know, how dumb is that? And the waste of those lives, and how the families are affected, and all the money spent, the trillions of dollars spent. What a waste. This is the Arctic wilderness. Guess what we're going to be doing in the Arctic wilderness? There are going to be oil wells there. This beautiful, pristine area. So that we can do this. Right? What a waste. Really dumb. And then the old people. Now my mother is gone. But where do they go? We throw away the old people in the Western world pretty much. We venerate them a little more in Asia. But, you know, you're just trying to get rid of them so that the other ones can come along, right? What about the wisdom? What about the things they've learned, the life experiences they have? And, of course, they're my grandchildren. What kind of legacy am I leaving? Or is my generation leaving for my grandchildren? What kind of problems are they going to be up against? What goes on television, even on the cartoon show, in terms of violence, people killing each other. World Future Society tells us, and this was in 2006, that U.S. public education will face the uphill battle for survival. Just the cost to repair our buildings, $322 billion, and we're spending our money on war. The way we fund research is really dumb. I mean, it's really pedestrian, especially public money for research. You've got to write these lengthy proposals, highly detailed. You can't take any risks, because if you take risks and you fail, you're doomed. So what you do is you take the money that's coming in for research, if you get any, and you're actually working on the next project. Because you've had to already do the work so you can write the proposal for this first project. And you can't do anything too outlandish. That virtual retinal display I showed you, I submitted a proposal to the National Science Foundation to fund that. You know what they said? My peers came back and reviewed it. They said it would never work. You'd never get it to work. And now there's a public company out there making them. I said, what do you mean it won't work? We've never seen anything like this. That ain't going to work. And I came to the conclusion early on that if you're any good, you don't have any peers. You're out there in front. And that's a dangerous place to be because you can't get any funding. It's broken. We know how to take the giant leaps, but we aren't given the opportunity. My feeling is if you aren't failing 9 out of 10 times, you aren't trying hard enough. We need to be pushing the boundaries, and we're not. So our intelligentsia, these universities and things like that, you know, completely broken. Also, we're broken because we put things into silos, you know, expecting that's the way the world works. Well, the HIT lab doesn't work that way. It cut across. That's where the action is. So I have a lot of concerns. One of them is about killing the earth. We're killing the earth. We need a rebirth. We need a renaissance. We need to rebirth the earth, as it were. But this is our raw material. So how are we going to change this? How are we going to change all of this? Well, I feel the key to the rebirth is returning the hearts of the children to the earth. And I have a formula for it. Now I want to lay on you. What if we put these pieces together? The pervasive problems that I've talked about, and there are more. This whole idea of research that really solves problems, along with games, which the kids want to do anyway, and a lot of kids. If we put them into together, what could we get? And that's my attempt number 4 that I'm in the process of doing right now, to turn the hearts of the children. I mentioned these things to you in the course of last 2 lectures, right? We can see what can happen with kids that have been thrown away, and that there's power there if we can harness it. So what I'm going to try to do is do this rebirth, which is going to be a function of all these things. And let's just look at some facts and figures. These are actually old figures. Look at how many people are out there playing games, computer games. In 2002, is a $30 billion industry, bigger than Hollywood. Online gaming, what's happening there. So what if you could get 1 million kids to pay $30 per year to be a member of a not-for-profit society where they get all kinds of new stuff, ways to interact with their computers, like with augmented reality, enriches their participation in research, gives them scholarships, and at the same time funds organizations for high-risk research. For 1 million kids, it would take, times 30, what do you get? $30 million. 15 million of that it would take to run the society. At least 15 million left over that you put into a not-for-profit foundation. And then what you do is provide a grant of $1 to $2 million a year to the HIT labs to do high-risk research, to push the limits. We could change the world. No strings attached. The idea is to push the boundaries, make mistakes.
$30 from young people who don't have any money.
Well, as it turns out, you don't get it from people who don't have any money. What you do is you get it from people who do have money. And then you give scholarships to the ones that don't. They're going to spend a lot more than $30 a year on their games that they're playing. Right? Yeah. So this is the Virtual World Society. The vision is to empower young minds. What we want to do in this empowerment is to give them an opportunity to do these things. And at the same time, fund research to solve the world's problems. So what we want to do is grow these kids, get them excited about research, get them excited about learning, which, by the way, they will get in the Virtual World Society, and then move them into, yeah. So this platform, interface devices, and the ingredients and so forth. And one of the players in this has already volunteered to the National Geographic Society. The National Geographic Society has about 8 to 12 million members already. The problem is nobody reads their magazines anymore. I mean, the old people do, but the young kids don't. They'll watch a TV program maybe, time to time. They have so much material that they can't even show too much. So what if you get your National Geographic magazine, you open it up to page 52, and there's this article about Mount Everest, sort of a commemoration of the conquest of Mount Everest. And there you have your magazine, but you look at the magazine with your webcam or with your glasses with the cameras built in, and now it comes alive. Now you're there. You still have the magazine, still have the text, all that kind of thing, but this comes alive, and now you go there. You're in that space. This is all content already exists, but there's no way to display it. And so this now becomes alive. So you don't throw away the magazine. You augment the magazine. You augment textbooks and things like that. So I have this plan, this business plan, to start the Virtual World Society, and I'm socializing it with a number of people. We have some infrastructure identified. I need about $5 to $6 million to get it going. And turns out the HIT labs and students will be generating content for it. And so there'll be jobs. So watch this place. Hopefully we'll have something happening in the future. So what's the take-home story for you guys after these 2 lectures and my little visit with you? I want to encourage you to work on some real problems. That doesn't mean you don't wax poetic and do some theory, but we've got some real problems out there to solve. Work with children, because they are our future. Help me with this Virtual World Society and to be happy. Now, there's a guy by the name of Randy Pausch. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Randy Pausch. He delivered the last lecture. Have you heard of him? Yeah. He was a friend of mine. Matter of fact, when you go and listen to the last lecture, you hear him talk about when he met me the first time. And so you can download, just Google Randy Pausch, and you'll get, and this is your homework assignment. I want you to listen to his lecture. It's not about computer science. It's about life and really achieving your childhood dreams. The reason they called it a last lecture because he died with pancreatic cancer. Incredible guy. And he also wrote a book called The Last Lecture. This sort of fills in the blanks of some of the things that he talked about in his lecture. And he left his widow and 3 children, young children. But what a testament of his life. And there are a lot of lessons that we can take from that. Because in the end, it's not about a master's degree. It's about, what you're going to do, the world. How you're going to make a world a better place. How you're going to be happy. And this may be, hopefully, part of that trip. So I want to thank my family for all they've done for me, because this is where the treasure is. And then my other family in the U.S., my family in New Zealand, my family in Australia. And I also have to thank my sponsors and all the people who've pumped money into the work that we've done in the past. And then ask you to contact me as you go along so I can help out in your journey, because that's really what I like to do. And that's the reason I hang out at universities, because this is where you guys are. This is where the action is. So you have any questions for me?
Actually, I've used HMD myself. I had one display myself, and I think we spent a lot of money on my last project. And when I use it, I figured that after a while it does get a bit heavy. And I mean, I think even though it's it was one of the best N1 displays 2 years ago, it did get heavy, and the experience sort of drifted away. So I just had one question, because I saw many of the early head-mounted displays that you have were quite big as well, and you had children using it who feel the weight more. So did you have any problems when children thought that that was kind of going of small interest?
Well, what you didn't see in it, yes, that's a real problem. The real problem is not the weight, it's the distribution of the weight. And what happens is that when you have a shift of the center of gravity on the head, of the axis, of the center of gravity of the head, when you shift that as a result of wearing something, then that creates a moment arm. That moment arm then requires muscle tension in order to correct. That's what leads to fatigue. You put this mass up front, it weighs down in the front. So what you didn't see is in those helmets the kids were wearing, we counterbalanced them. So we kept the same center of gravity on the head, except the one that you saw with the green space thing. And we were using just standard ones there. But when we were working with the kids, it was all counterbalanced. What wasn't there, though, when you have that mass on the head, you also create inertia. And so when you're moving your head, it's not like you're with the helmet on. You have this other mass that you're moving. So when you try to stop your head, it won't move because you have a lot more momentum built up in the mass. So you have to. It does become tiring after a while if you're looking around quite a bit. Even that Darth Vader helmet that you saw had a negator spring assembly. So what that did was shift the center of gravity in effect back. And so even though you had this mass on your head, you didn't feel anything in terms of shifting the weight. And that's what really causes the fatigue. But with the new technology, we should be getting way beyond that. If you talk about the virtual retinal display, it's practically weightless. When you're shifting a lot of the weight back here too. And so you're talking about an ounce, maybe an ounce or so.
You talked about computer games just for that last section. I was wondering if you could talk about, returning children's minds and hearts to
right.
the earth. But then on the other side, you've got virtual reality, which is taking them away from reality. What your thoughts are about actually.
Right. Very good question. What you want to do is get a child to go out to see a real tree, but to understand more about the real tree. And so a virtual reality will not take the place of going into a real forest. But what it can do is make the whole real forest become alive for you in your understanding. So the idea is to get the kids things into their head and get them out of the house. That's what the Virtual World Society does. That's why we want to work with augmented reality, because we want to transport the things that we get from their desktop computers into what they can see in the real world, and then help them appreciate what is really in the real world. That's the way we steer them away from the games, to get them to relate now back to the world, and for them to appreciate there's a whole lot of wonderful experiences they have out there. And because, I mean, it's so easy to get them sucked into these games, and especially with virtual reality, you can imagine. But here's the other part of it. The content that's in those games in the Virtual World Society is all edutainment. It has to do with learning about energy and learning about AIDS and learning about these things without their really knowing it, that that's what they're doing. So that they have a desire to go learn more about them. So the idea is to activate, to create this interest so that they'll have a desire to learn. That's at least our pedagogy for this. And one of the things we want the kids in the society to do is to engage with real professionals in a particular field early on in a problem domain. That we may have 5 or 10 problem domains, and they get into those parts of the club and then start working with faculty members and with graduate students, people like that that are in that domain, and that the gameplay starts centering. Then they go together to these places and learn about it, and then they come to the summer camps at the university where they meet with these people for real. And then ultimately they have scholarships, to actually study. The whole idea is to get to awaken and get the tension, some redirected. But you're not going to do that unless you use what they're doing now and steering it, I believe, in another direction.
Things that they're used to understand.
Right. And something that's a real grabber, something that is so far beyond what they have now. We're talking about augmented reality, what we can do with their machines, and use that gimmick to grab their attention and begin to move it over this other side.
Something new and exciting.
Right.
Channeling it in the right direction that's going to be positive.
Yeah. Now, it may not work. I mean, you may not get 1 million. You may say, okay, we get 10,000 kids and that's it. But I think it'll be the opposite. Viral marketing, especially if it's really cool, you're not going to have 1 million kids, you'll have 10 million. And that's what worries me. As a matter of fact, it can implode. Just the weight of it, and all the excitement. And there's a burnout, you just get all excited about it, and then if you can't deliver, So that's why I want to start it here in New Zealand or in Tasmania, so that we start and control it a little bit and see how it grows and organically, and then begin to launch it further out. Yeah.
You got to be a bit careful with what you deliver. Like, you want to give them enough information to capture their attention, but not too much for them to be like, well, I kind of think I know all about this now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you want to make the gameplay, even though it may have competition in there, it's competition to solve a problem. It's like this thing I mentioned with the submarines, that you want to have that as to draw their attention in and suck them into this. And so that they are using that stuff where they were shooting each other in World of Warcraft or whatever it was, picking up women and stealing cars and Grand Theft Auto. You want to take that and move it to another side of things. And I have confidence in the kids because I've seen them. You know, it's those adults that create those games that are screwing over the kids. Immature adults, that's right. When in fact, left to their own devices, the kids know. I mean, they really do know more than we think. They see what's going on around them. We need to give them a chance to orchestrate some of this themselves.
Things that they just get exposed to, like
yeah,
they're all just sponges. They want to just, you know,
yeah,
they want to be good at what they're doing. They want to know what's new and next level.
And you look at the cartoons. Oh gosh, I mean, even the cartoon channel, the stuff that's on there.
Again, it's all adult stuff.
Yeah, adults
They
making
think
that
they
stuff.
know what they should
Yeah.
be.
You know, one of the people have gotten it right is Disney. If you go to Disney World, Disneyland, you guys ever been to Disneyland or Disney World? It is magic. And it's through the eyes of a child. And they have, everybody loves Disneyland. And it's because you can be a child again. You don't have to do these adult things. And yeah.
It's amazing the creative power of children as well, like because they don't have so many burdens such as like most adults have. We always end up having all these burdens that prevent us from releasing creative energy.
Yeah.
But, for them, it's sort of almost just waiting to be utilised. And I don't know.
Let me show you something. Have you guys know about Ken Robinson? You guys heard of him? Okay, let me just show you a short video, and we probably ought to quit after that.
Yeah,
okay.
fair enough.
Well, it may not be. Well, if you can you hang around for this? Okay, let's see here. Can you hang around, Michael? Okay.